Well, it seems the correct day for that. Let's talk about German indie enthusiasm. And, well, happy Thanksgiving. Cheers. Welcome back, everybody, to me talking about book things. And today we are doing the thing that I promised for weeks. A quick introduction and official announcement for this year's holiday reading thing, Karlmas 2025-26, when we talk about Karl May novels, a lot of them, from December 25th to January the 6th of January 2026. That's the plan. I hope it will all work out. Yeah. My thought was to give you a quick introduction to what this will be, how it will work out, and the reading order, and in case some of you want to read some of those books, and so forth. Yeah, let's get started. As in the previous 2 years, I decided to do, well, I asked you, and you decided that we will do this, this thing where between Christmas and Epiphany, in those magical 13 nights, we will be reading, or I will be reading, some books that had a huge impact on me as a person, or that have had an impact on some people, as, you know, children's books, young adult novels, whatever, and so forth, and have one video for one book per day in these, you know, so 13 videos is the plan. And through a vigorous process of elimination, the choice was to talk about novels by German novelist Karl May. And for the last couple of weeks, I've been trying really hard to figure out which books to pick and so forth. And I have made decisions. And yeah, so I'll give you the reading order in a bit. And I also wanted to go back and give like a quick introduction to Karl May, why he's important, and what I will try to do this time that might be slightly different from previous ones, and what will be the same, and so forth. So let's start with Karl May. Now, if you are an American or Canadian or British, you may not have heard of that guy unless you have, heard me talk about him for a moment. If you live in Europe, it's probably a bit of a staple. Karl May is, according to some sources, still the best-selling German author of all time. His books have been sold, according to, well, once again, the official sources, over 200 million books of Karl May's have been sold, and over 100 million of those in German and, well, in the German language. So lots of books, to put it mildly. And he's been, like, very popular and influential. Albert Einstein famously has a quote where he talks about how he was influenced as a young adult by Karl May novels and how they still give him comfort in his hours of need. Arnold Schwarzenegger has mentioned that he grew up on Karl May novels that opened up his vision to go and do things, and obviously other famous Austrians like Adolf Hitler also mentioned numerous times that Karl May was his favorite author of all time. So whatever you want to say, the dude had influence, but he was also like a very interesting guy in his own right. He was born in 1842 in Saxony in the Ore Mountains. That's somewhere close to Dresden, and it's, yeah, as I said, like, they're called the Ore Mountains because there's lots of iron ore and lots of mining around that area. He was born there. He wanted to become a teacher. He was banned from becoming a teacher because he stole a classmate's watch at the time. He then became a con man, pretended to be a doctor, among other things, got into prison, and after coming out of prison, he started writing a lot from like the 1850s, 60s, well, 1870s onwards. He started writing a lot, first as a newspaper editor with short stories and stuff like that, and later on his big thing became writing travel narratives. Now, before writing travel narratives, he was writing more like, novels that are in the style of something that a Alexandre Dumas might write, publishing in episodes in newspapers, getting ever more convoluted and so forth. But he hit his stride in the 1890s with a long series of travel narratives, either set in mostly the Middle East and the Ottoman Empire or the American West. That's what made him the household name in German writing, German literature, and so forth, for, well, very much a century. All of this, of course, while he had never been to either the Ottoman Empire or the American West at the time of writing these stories. He did travel later on in life when he was rich enough to do that, but at that point it was already clear that he had made up all of these things. Nevertheless, he had a huge impact and probably single-handedly developed the German interest in mostly the American West and Native American culture that has a huge impact on German culture all the way until today, in a way that is interestingly enough, weirdly specific to Germany. I recently read Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones, and in his acknowledgements, Stephen Graham Jones mentions that he read a story by Kafka, and Kafka in particular talked about how he wanted to be a, quote, Red Indian, unquote, and Stephen Graham Jones is still fascinated by that. Well, here's the reason why Kafka wanted to become an Indian, because of reading books like this. So there is a very specific element of German culture tied into these stories. And that, I think, is, reason enough to read Karl May. He's already, he was a weird person in a lot of ways. He was very specifically influenced by German forms of Christianity. He was an avid pacifist and other things of the sorts. And his last couple of years, he wrote pseudo-philosophical texts, gave lectures on pacifism, anti-racism, and so forth. So really interesting character in his own right. He passed away in 1912, a couple of weeks after giving a lecture on a future state for humanity in Vienna, which a Nobel Peace Laureate visited and watched, and supposedly, but that has not been confirmed, also Adolf Hitler visited and watched Karl May give that lecture at the time. He obviously took the wrong lessons from said lecture, which I think you can find online because it should be in the public domain. So yeah, interesting guy in his own right. Since then, Germany has, several museums. There is a Karl May Society that publishes all of his collected works. There are Karl May festivals where his books are turned into plays and performed in open-air theaters. There have been movies based on his novels from the 1960s onwards and so forth. As I said, it's a huge deal in Germany, but not just in Germany, but also in Europe in general. His novels have been translated, according to, once again, the internet, into somewhere between 30 and 50 languages, a lot of them being European, Eastern European, Central European languages, Czech, Bulgarian, Croatian, also Dutch, Hungarian, Turkish. So it is a phenomenon for mostly Europe, which makes Karl May an interesting choice, I think, for a channel that is all done in English. Obviously, I read Karl May as a kid. Most of the books, I think all of them, I either bought from, pocket money as a 10-year-old on some, charity book bazaar or something, or I inherited from my parents or even my grandparents, because, this stuff has been around in German culture for the longest time. Yeah. That's basically the story of Karl May, really trimmed down to why I think it's worth talking about him and why we will be doing it in this way. So I sat back and thought about which sort of books to pick. As I said, those are travel narratives. A lot of them are set either in America or in the Middle East. There are some that are set in, not North America, but in somewhere in Central America or even South America. And there are some that are set in the Far East, East Asia, but the core are these set in either the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire mostly, and the American West. So the question was which books to pick. And there are obviously some that you kind of have to pick, and there are some that feel a bit more off. And the previous years we went by publication order. With Karl May, that is a bit difficult because, as already mentioned, Karl May, a lot of his stuff was originally published in newspapers, and later reassembled into individual novels that are sometimes, heavily re-edited and so forth. So it's a bit difficult to do that. There's, as I said, an official sort of Karl May complete works series that is I think, still ongoing. They're somewhere in the high 80s with like publications at this point, so lots of books. But I decided to narrow it down to some books from, say, that Middle Eastern sort of cycle. In German, it's called Orientzyklus or Oriental cycle or Orient cycle, which very problematic term, and we'll get back to that. And some of the Western stories. And as it happens, we can do that sort of in publication order. So here's the publication, the reading order that I have come up with for this year. We'll start with Treasure in Silver Lake. That is a Western novel. It kind of stands out in that it is not, as far as I remember, it's been decades at this point, not written in first person. Most of these travel narratives are written in first person, with Karl May presumably talking about his travels in the West. Obviously, they are invented, but, you know, the travel narrative is a staple of 19th century literature in general, so it kind of fits. Treasure in Silver Lake was published written in 1891. So before the big sort of like start of his travel narratives, and it's more like a conventional adventure story from the 19th century. So that's the one that we will start with. It does already feature his main character, Western main characters, Winnetou and old Shatterhand. These names are ridiculous. Trust me, it's getting worse. And but they are more like walk-on characters, and then later on developed into the, you know, main sort of mainstays and biggest, most famous characters of May's oeuvre in the novels that come later. But it is, in that regard, an early work where we can see what May is going for, and then we can look at like how things change. So that's the first one that we will read, or that I will read. I think Treasure in Silver Lake is available in an English translation, possibly even on in ebook, but they are kind of difficult to find in English. I grant you that. So in case some of you want to read some of them, I think there are some for free online, because those books have been around for a long time. Some people have made fan translations and so forth. I can't vouch for the quality of any of those, as I read all of that stuff in German, and I will read it in German again. But I'll put the titles and everything in German and in English down below, so you can search for the ones in case you are interested in reading some really weird German westerns from the 19th century, for example. So, Treasure in Silver Lake, the first one. Then we will switch continents, because the next thing in publication order is 6 volumes of the so-called Orient cycle. And this one is interesting in that, as far as I know, there's no official English translation, or there have been English translation of some of the novels. It's really hard to find official English titles for each of those. Well, so the German one for Treasure in Silver Lake is, of course, Der Schatz im Silbersee. And for the next 6 novels that we will read in publication order, because these are the ones that come out between 1892 and 1896 or so, in rough order, right? It starts with Durch die Wüste, which in English is called, as far as I can tell, In the Desert. Some people translate it as Through the Desert, which would be more accurate, but, you know, will be difficult. Which introduces another alter ego of Karl May's, traveling through the Ottoman Empire in the 19th century, a place that Germany had a lot of interest in. If you have read, say, Golgotha by Tidar, or know anything about 19th century Ottoman history, you already know that. And it's a really interesting and weird time. So that is Durch die Wüste, or In the Desert. It continues with Durchs wilde Kurdistan, which will probably be translated in like Through Kurdistan, sometimes through Wild Kurdistan, who knows. I'm doing my best here with translations. It's very difficult to find official translations for any of these, so it's kind of difficult for that specific area. I'm sorry for that. I'm doing my best. It follows the next one, which will be From Baghdad to Stambul, or Von Bagdad nach Stambul, or From Baghdad to Istanbul, depending on the translation. But yeah, that's the next one. Then follows In den Schluchten des Balkan, or In the Gorges of Balkan, or of the Balkans. Something like that. The next one will be Durchs Land der Skipetaren, which is very difficult to translate. I've found an older one that says through the country of Albany, which that sounds very 19th century. So it's either through the land of the Skipetars or through Albania, something like that. Good luck finding those. If you can, let me know. If any of you have links or whatever, you can very much put them down in the comments, and I'll add all of that stuff together. So I'll keep this one sort of in the description updated in case I come across any of these things. All right, and then the final one is called Der Schut, or in English, the Schut. What that means, we'll have to find out, don't we? All right, so that's the 6 volumes of the Orient Cycle, which brings us up to the first week of all of this, which is, 7 books. Then we return to the West, to the American West, and to 2 trilogies that come in publication order. Well, first in publication order, but there is like one step in between where a number of novels was published that are in different places, which are unfortunately further trilogies, so it's kind of difficult, and I had to decide where to go with this. We start with Winnetou I, and then Winnetou II and Winnetou III. That's a trilogy of Western novels, and probably the most famous ones by Karl May, period. There exist English translations for those. I have no idea how good they are. I have seen them on Amazon as Kindle ebooks. Possibly you can find them in other formats as well, if you're interested in those. This is sort of like the big one. There also exist German or European-made movies from the 1960s. Winnetou I was published in 1963, and the other one, after that. They are available online in case you want to watch them. Officially, I guess you can buy them either on YouTube's official, I think, paid stuff for YouTube movies. I have never used that. Possibly they're on Amazon Prime as well. I have no idea. But they exist in case you want to watch a really weird European movie project. Produced mostly by German television or German movie companies, but together with French movie companies, and famously Yugoslavia at the time. They were filmed in parts of, I think, mostly Croatia and Serbia these days. I don't know. So a really interesting European project when you compare it to other westerns that were published, filmed at the time, where the famous Italian western productions usually were filmed somewhere in Spain. Germany and France chose to film those somewhere in the Balkans. So they exist for Winnetou I, II, and III. There also exists a movie for Treasure in Silver Lake, from possibly somewhere later, and not as close to the novel from my very, very dim childhood memories. And then we'll go to the final trilogy, which is the old Surehand trilogy, 1, 2, and 3. And 1 and 2 are following in publication order after Winnetou III. But then there is another trilogy set in the Middle East before we get to old Surehand III, but I decided to go with that and not just fully in publication order, because it would be weird to start the trilogy in the country of the Mahdi and only have the first novel of that one read. So we'll go with old Surehand I, 2, and 3. I don't think there exist movies for that trilogy as far as I know. So that's the reading order. Once again, we'll go through them in a reading order. We start with Treasure in Silver Lake. There exists an English translation, and there exists a movie if you really want to see one. Then we'll go to the Orient Cycle, which is through the desert or in the desert, through Kurdistan, through wild Kurdistan, or in German, Durchs, wilde Kurdistan. Then it goes to von Bagdad nach Stambul, which is from Baghdad to Istanbul, or Baghdad to Stambul. Moves on to in den Schluchten des Balkan, or in the gorges of the Balkans. Moves to Durchs Land der Skipetaren, or possibly through the land of the Skipetars, whatever that may be. And ends with Der Schut, or the Schut. Then we move on to Winnetou I, Winnetou II, Winnetou III, and old Surehand I, old Surehand II, and old Surehand III. And at that point, I feel my brain will be very, very much cooked. I have, as far as I remember, once again, I think I have read all of these as a kid. I'm not quite sure if I read old Surehand III. I'm sure I own most of these as printed books still somewhere at my parents' at my mother's place. So I might snap some pictures when I next visit there for like old school book content, right? As I said, there are movies for some of them. There are translations for some of them. I will link some interesting stuff down below in case you want to prepare in any way, shape, or form. There's a 2-episode, I think, Behind the Bastards podcast series on Karl May, which might be a fun sort of like introduction in case you want to get more of like how weird that guy was. I will probably read some or reread some of the novels that influenced Karl May. That would be some of the adventure stories written by James Fenimore Cooper, obviously for like his image of the West, which says a lot if you write stories set in the 1860s, 70s, or whatever, and you base them on stories written by Cooper in the 1810s or whenever those were originally written. So there's already some weird shift in projection. I will also obviously reread Orientalism by Edward Said. I read it like years ago. I even made a video about it back in the day, because we will have to talk about concepts like Orientalism as well. So that's the plan. I think this year will be slightly different, and that compared to both the Drismas and Mausmas with Karlmas, I feel I will have to do a bit more explaining. I don't usually look at the analytics of this channel, but from what I remember, most of my audience, most of you guys, comes from, America, Canada, Australia, or like English-speaking language places. So chances are that there's a lot of context I might have to give to explain where these stories come from and so forth. So I will try, and I can't promise that because, other stuff, but I'll try to have like an introductory video for Karlmas Eve, basically, where I, give a little bit more context on German history, intellectual history of the 19th century, maybe give a quick callback to Orientalism and other concepts of the sort. So we kind of have like a basis from which to start. That is an idea. I can't promise that, but I think it might be worth doing that. And with like each individual book, I will of course, do the usual things, give you like a quick introduction, like synopsis or whatever of the events, summary. All of these books are, as I said, like really old, over a century and, old at this point. But still, I'll try to keep it spoiler-free, and then I'll talk about individual elements that we can learn from that, and hopefully I'll try to also draw, some lessons out of that we can learn about, like, German views on the world, German history, and so forth, because I think with something this old, it is essential to point out the large influence. As I said, like 100 million books sold in the German language. That's a lot of people. That's more than all of Germany right now. So you can see the impact, and another like almost 100 million copies sold worldwide in other languages, right? That's a huge impact. And still very much, it's easy to sort of like underestimate that impact because it is slowly falling into the past with, newer generations probably no longer reading a lot of this stuff. But it has shaped the generation of, partly still my generation, definitely the generation of my parents and grandparents, and those have had like a lot of impact on like shaping the country that I live in, but also shaping, all of Europe in a lot of ways and the world. So might be worth talking about all of that. That's the plan for this year's Karlmas. One thing, as I said, it's set in the West. It has a very unique German image of Native American culture and so forth. That is different from an American image, very much so. It is very clear, Karl May is very clear that what is happening in America at the time is a form of genocide. Obviously, it doesn't have the word yet because the word was coined much later. But he's very clear about that, and it leans much more towards sort of the idea of a noble savage than anything else. It is, in that regard, interesting and somewhat unique, but it is still very much about different forms of stereotypes. Racist stereotypes can be positive or negative, so there will be discussions of all of those elements, which is, I guess, a good way to start the holiday season with today's holiday being very much about reinventing a past in America anyway. So, yeah. thanks for watching this. Happy Thanksgiving to those of you who celebrated today. I hope you are as excited as I am to to reinvestigate my sordid past when I was like just 10 years old and wanted to become, well, the same thing that Kafka wanted to be, which is, of course, no, I didn't want to become a Red Indian. It's not that bad, but yeah. So I guess, yeah. Let's get started with all of that over the next month in preparation and start on Christmas with Treasure in Silver Lake. Until then, I don't know, like, subscribe, comment. If you have, links to any of the translations or whatever, don't hesitate to either put them there or message me in one way or another so I can put them in the description in case YouTube doesn't want to have the links in there. We'll collect all of that. I'll update it every time I have more of a, have more information in case some of you want to look at any of these books. That's it. I'll see you very soon, and until then, thanks and cheers.